Hola, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we're back from a little break. You've been on holiday, as always.
My rare day off, what are you talking about?
You've been in Spain.
I've been in Spain visiting my parents.
And it's been lovely. And we're back with a Spanish movie.
And they say hello, by the way. I forgot to say.
Oh, so. Well, I'll say hello to them as well. They're lovely. Love your parents.
Yes, well, they love you too.
Good. And we've just been to see Pedro Almodóvar's latest film, Pain and Glory, which you've already seen a little while ago in Argentina.
Yes, and which I keep kind of naming Hope and Glory after the John Boorman film, and of course they don't resemble each other at all. Well, I mean, I suppose, you know, they do in the sense that they're both about memories of childhood, I suppose. But anyway, yes, this is the second time I've seen it. I saw it in Argentina, and I thought it was like fantastic. I've seen it again. I think it's even better. It worked with the audience in Buenos Aires. It worked with the audience here. I mean, you could, you know, just feel the audience react to it and kind of, you know, and I loved it even more. Yeah,
the first time I've seen it, and I think I've only seen one other of Almodóvar's films, which is Julieta, his last.
Right, yes.
I don't think I've seen All About My Mother. I'm sure you've shown a clip or two of it when we were at university. Yes. I don't think I've watched the whole thing.
Well, it's a pity that you haven't seen, you know, because I really do think that, I do have a very special and individual kind of relationship to his work. His work has been meaningful to me on a personal level. But that aside, I also think he is one of the great directors, you know, of the last 40 or 50 years. And his work kind of, I think it's gotten better. He's gotten more and more technically proficient. This film is a marvel of narration, actually, you know, and in some ways very similar to what Bad Education does. But I think what this does is even more complex and more seamless, right? Just, you know, the way that the story is told, the way that it moves from the past to the present, the different points of view, how you're giving the information that you're given, right? So kind of, you know, yeah. So anyway, I think he's one of the great filmmakers. And also, unlike other filmmakers, his work, as it unfolds, gets richer and richer by being self-referential.
Yeah.
Yeah? By kind of, you know, so when you're watching this film, you know, which I think, I don't know, but I think everyone will appreciate. You don't need to have seen his other films in order to appreciate it or get it. On the other hand, if you have seen his other films, then it becomes even greater, even more beautiful. You can see, you know, how you're in communication with this consciousness that is Almodóvar's, right? That, you know, it's a world that he's describing, and it gets richer by kind of being reinforced or rhyming or being in dialogue with bits of his, you know, all of the rest of his films.
He's a filmmaker who has a reputation for making films about himself, and or kind of inspired by his life in very personal ways, and it's referred to very specifically here with the Salvador Mayo, the director character played by Antonio Banderas, being clearly sort of an analogue or a version of Almodóvar through which he's kind of speaking or referring to himself. But particularly I'm thinking of the scenes with his mother when she's old and she's dying, and she talks about how the people in our village don't like you making films about us. They think you talk about us as bumpkins. Yes. You know, and we're not like that. And he says, no, I have nothing but respect for you. And then she mentions the word autofiction.
Yes.
And he's like, where'd you get that from? She says, I read it in an article.
It's in an interview with you.
That's right. That's it. So the film kind of makes a joke, but also kind of the reference to that, I think, it's very, very knowing and very, very self-referential. And the film, as you say, is kind of doing it all over. So this is kind of a spoiler. You see all of these flashbacks intercut with the kind of contemporaneous story of Salvador as a child with his mother, played by Penélope Cruz. And right at the very end, the final shot of the film reveals that these flashbacks aren't in fact flashbacks. They are the film that Salvador is now making about his childhood.
And that you are now seeing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a wonderful little reveal, and I thought it was absolutely lovely.
Well, actually, it's the same reveal that you get in his previous, most autobiographical film, which is Bad Education.
Right.
Which, yeah. In which kind of, just before... But there it was just before the movie ends. You realise you're in a film studio. But
that's it here. This is the last shot in this film.
Yeah, I know. This is the last shot, but in the other film...
It was earlier.
It was earlier.
Right,
so, there's a reveal that it's a film within a film, and then stuff happens.
Right.
But actually, I was mindful in this film of, how the work connects. For example, one of the songs was by Alaska, who is, who was the star of his very first film, Pepe Lucy Bomb. She was one of the stars. Antonio Banderas appeared, from his second film, Labyrinth of Passion, was Antonio Banderas' first film, and the first that he did with Almodóvar, and then they went on to do a whole series of them. So many of his films have been about film directors, so Law of Desire, and then, of course, Broken Embraces, which, calls back on women on the verge of a nervous breakdown, the re-edit of that film that was meant to be women on the verge of a nervous breakdown is part of it. Chavela Vargas, the singer, is kind of used in women on the verge of a nervous breakdown. This thing about the neighbors, you see that in Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down when they go into the country, and you also see that actually, I think, in The Flower of My Secret. His real mother appeared in his films until she died, really. So, this whole thing about the director's mother and that actually makes you recall his real mother appearing in films like, What Have I Done to Deserve This? Or, the newsreader in High Heels, which she played. And actually some of the shots, these shots of typing, right? They recur throughout his films. Yeah, his films are so much about telling stories, but also about writing, right? And then, of course, there have been video essays done about the way that he uses art. And in this film in particular, it was highly publicized before that the director's apartment is in fact an exact reproduction of his own apartment in Madrid.
Is that true?
That's true, yeah. So, it's hardly a secret, right? So I loved it. I loved it as cinema. I loved the way that, film, for me, I always say this, but I feel it's true, it's so great because it calls on all you know, and you never know enough, to kind of fully grasp the great films. But Almodóvar is someone who consistently uses, language, image, music, art, painting, right? In this things he's reading Fernando Pessoa's poems, right? So what he's reading, he's underlining, and it becomes kind of part of the narration of the film. Yeah, he's got books thrown around. So, Antonio Lopez, for example, the Spanish painter, is one of them. He uses clips within clips. So in this one, it's very telling that he refers to Elia Kazan's, I forget what the title of the film is, the one with Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty. I think the film is 1962. It's obviously a film that marked him because he also refers to it in What Have I Done to Deserve This?
Splendor in the Grass?
Splendor in the Grass, yeah. Which is about, Natalie Wood has kind of like a sexual awakening, and then, because it's forbidden, it drives her mad, really, which you can see, there's an element of that in this film, because it's also about, a child's kind of sexual awakening in ways that he doesn't understand. Yeah.
The first desire.
Yes.
As the title of the film becomes at the end.
That's right,
And I think, isn't Almodóvar's production company
it's called
The Desire?
That's right.
El Desire, right?
Yeah, which harks back to the very first film he produced independently, which is The Law of Desire, yeah?
Yeah.
So this thing about desire, and desire always being out of reach and incomplete and ungraspable and so on. That's also a theme in the film, and I think it's kind of very beautifully handled. There are moments that the film had me kind of in tears, really, you know, because it's also a film about sadness. Yeah, I mean, that first image of Antonio Banderas in the pool, kind of underwater, right, which is almost like abstract in some way, because, you know, I mean, it's very concrete, obviously, it's Antonio Banderas as the character, but also he's got this bushy underhair arm that's kind of almost like spreading all out. Yeah, you know, I don't know if you noticed, that creates an incredible image, really. And he's so great in this, Antonio Banderas. And of course, the first time you hear his voice, the sound of the voice is of someone tired of life, depressed, sad. Just the sound, just the way he speaks his first lines, like weary, right? You know, yeah.
That's certainly what you get from his voiceover.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the tone he strikes in his voiceover.
Yeah.
And the film, it's also about aging and
Yes.
and reflecting on your past, and in that respect, it's very similar to Julieta,
Yes.
in which Julieta kind of, I think she goes back to her old apartment in Madrid when she's kind of a middle-aged woman, and then writes about her past and the people in it, and so you see these sort of, as I recall it, I only saw it the once, but you had kind of different timelines intercut in that, but it was all related to what she was writing, her memories, and in this, he doesn't exactly write about his memories, although things that he has written about his past and his kind of experiences do come up, particularly in the text, the addiction text. But it's all about his past coming back. So right at the start, it's this kind of chance meeting with. Chance is great in the film as well. Actually, it struck me. There's a chance meeting with this woman who he'd worked with before, this actress, who then speaks to him about this actor that he'd formerly worked with.
Yeah. And that actress, sorry, just to interject, is Cecilia Roth, who played Cecilia in Labyrinth of Passion, and who played the mother in All About My Mother, right? So it's like you have all of these strands of continuities, right, through the use of music, through the use of shots, through the casting of particular actors, right? Yeah.
So he meets her by chance in the sort of hotel lobby or something, and they have this conversation about a film that he'd made 32 years ago with an actor called Alberto Crespo, who's played by Asier Echeandia. Hope I'm pronouncing that about right.
Well, you're not, but it doesn't matter. That's about as well as an English person could do it.
Well, go on, you do it. You're Spanish.
Well, I don't have the name in front of me, so, and I can remember. Okay.
It's about the third or fourth one down.
So, Asier Echeandia.
I was 75% there. He's fantastic, and he's an actor who clearly they well, as you learn, they had a kind of falling out on making of the film. Salvador directed him in a certain way that he didn't really pay attention to. He played the character in a different way, and it took him a long time to come to terms with that.
I love that. I love that they attribute that difference in interpretations to drugs. Yeah, that, you know, the character was one who took cocaine and was lively and happy and light, and in real life, the actor playing him took heroin, so, you know, brought a gravity to the performance.
And the film now is considered a classic. There's a wonderful line. It's almost a throwaway line, but it's the way that Salvador says they think it's a classic now.
Yeah.
Which kind of made me think about how a creator thinks about their work. I mean, you hear creators talk about their work, and they don't think about it in the same way that audiences do. I think audiences want to go back to films like Apocalypse Now, whatever it might be, so like the classic from years ago, and say that's your finest work. And the director will be saying, no, the film I made yesterday is my finest work. I forgot about the thing I made 30 years ago.
Well, filmmakers often speak about the films that were least appreciated as being their orphans, being their favorites. Yeah, the ones that they feel they really that expresses them well, but that somehow did not have a success with audience or critics or whatever. Yeah,
so Salvador obviously has a different relationship to this film than the audience does, because he says, they think it's a classic now, and obviously his relationship is one of, he has this sort of grudge that he holds about not getting the performance that he wanted out of
But
Alberto.
He also admits that he saw it on television that was very good. So
that's right. He talks about, recently I've seen more in the performance than...
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that's a chance meeting, and then that chance meeting leads to this reconnection with this old actor who he hasn't seen in a very, very long time. There's also this chance thing about this the drawing that the guy in the town that he lived with, he and his mother when he was very young moved to this sort of series of caves which houses had been built in, and one of the people in that town he kind of became friends with and taught how to read, and that guy drew a picture of him. That shows up later purely by chance. Yeah. It's this thing that shows up in a catalogue, and that's me, you know. And the idea that this kind of happens from out of nowhere, I think sometimes it's difficult. I think sometimes Western cinema doesn't really accept that. I think in Western cinema you have the chance thing right at the start of like the meet cute where the characters meet, but everything after that in a story has to make absolute sense, has to make contextual, logical sense. Like this happens, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this. And I love that it just makes so much sense, and it's easy to accept here that this thing just shows up, and a thing from his past shows up and just takes the story in a slightly different direction again.
I remember reading Buñuel, and he was saying, and Octavio Paz on Buñuel, the Mexican writer, talking about the importance of chance in the work of Luis Buñuel. Yeah, and you can see how interesting it is in a way to compare the kind of cinema that is like classic Hollywood, because classic Hollywood cinema is a cinema that makes sense of the world, that gives you largely an orderly view of it. You're always orientated geographically. The story is always told in ways, you know, that the spectator can understand it, right? You know, the cutting is in particular ways so that you make sense of all of these things, right? Important things are often repeated so that you get it, right? And actually, kind of, life is not like that. Life is full of chance happenings,
yeah,
right? And kind of, you know, things that don't even make sense in retrospect, right? Like kind of, you know, you go to England to do an MA and you end up staying the rest of your life there, and it's not planned, and it's, you know, yeah. So
but that's the one thing. The thing with that painting is the one true element of chance, because they talk in the car about how did this happen, how did it end up in this flea market? Oh, we just happened to come across it, and you know, fate or God or whatever else decided that it finally found the person it was meant for. But the other things do have context built in, where, you know, the film is 32 years old, it's having this
the film is being shown as part of a season at the Spanish Cinematheque, the Cine d'Ore, where I was just last week, paying my homage to the cinema itself and to Almodóvar, because that particular cinema, the Cinematheque in Madrid, the Cine d'Ore, reappears in many of his films, right? So there's very famously in Talk to Her, there's a whole scene of the shrinking lover done as a silent film, you know, which is kind of imagined as a film scene at the Cine d'Ore, right? So they're having a season...
restoration, that's the word I was thinking of.
Yeah, the film, the negative has been restored, and they're showing it as part of a season of films, and they've been asked to do a Q&A.
Yeah, so that leads to him reconnecting with Alberto, the actor. That leads to this kind of slightly developing relationship between them. That leads to Alberto discovering the text,
the addiction
on Salvador's computer when Salvador is zoned out on heroin. That leads him to saying, I want to perform this, I have to perform this. Eventually he lets him, and when Alberto performs this, an old flame of Salvador's happens to see it by chance. He happens to be in Madrid, but again there's a little bit of context built in. He recognises the name of the actor. He'd met him 2 or 3 times back in the past when they were making that film 30 years ago. So there's a reason that he went to see that show in particular. But it is still one thing leads to another, and just these elements of chance built in, and you end up with this scene where Salvador and what's the fellow's name, Federico reconnect. Which was an amazing scene.
That was so beautiful.
These guys were lovers for 3 years, and it's this reconnection of old friends and old lovers and people who just haven't seen each other in 30 years, and it's magical.
Yes, it feels so true, you know, to one's experience as well, you know, of kind of reconnecting just with old friends. Yeah.
And I love the colours in that scene. That it's geometric and vibrant. Like the door of the lift is this bright red, and the walls are kind of a bright blue, and there are these clashes of really bold colours as they, like, it kind of enlivens the world when they come back together. And it's wonderful, and there's a knowingness in the performance. I mean, the performances in that scene are just the chemistry that their two have. Federico is played by Leonardo Sbaraglia.
Who's an Argentinian star.
And that has to be my favourite scene in the film. As you say, it feels so true to life, and it feels so beautifully organic, how the conversation shifts and moves between them.
For me, there are so many things, though. Again, they might be kind of... I mean, here's where an element of autobiography, I suppose, comes in. The opening scenes with the women doing the washing, I mean, that reminds me of my childhood. Certainly when I was young, kind of, that's the way that women did the washing. They went to the river, and they did their wash, and they hung it out in the sun, right? Kind of, and I suppose for Spanish audiences, it has a special significance because the song that the women begin to sing is a very famous old Lola Flores song, A tu vera, by your side, which they begin to sing, and it's basically a woman saying that she'll be by her man's side, until she dies. So, and if you build that into the mother and son relationship, because in a way that's what you see throughout the rest of the film. You see a mother and son kind of being together until she dies, and and having a relationship, that's very loving, but at the same time also, in that
there's a tension in it.
Yeah, in that kind of peasant way. It's not a tension, but it's very plain spoken. You've been a bad son, she tells him, right? And she doesn't tell him in anger or rancor or bitterness or as a way of hurting him, right? Yeah. She just tells it to him as a fact.
But also, she does that when it's very clear that she's dying.
Yes.
And it's a kind of, I suppose it's a flashback scene. It's not one of the film within a film scenes, but it is going back 4 years to when she passed away, and he's kind of looking after her. And it's this kind of whole movement of the film where it's very clear that this is a coda to her life. So you kind of wonder, like, it just seemed to me that there was a feeling of that around that line of dialogue. You've been a bad son. Feels like she's able to say that in a way because she is not long for this earth. And as you say, it's not a cruel line. It's not meant cruelly. It's meant in a plain spoken, honest way. But it does feel like it's a line that somehow comes out because she's able to say it because this is kind of wrapping things up for her.
The interesting thing in terms of Almodóvar's entire oeuvre is that there's no director I can think of who has spoken his love of his mother more assiduously, and for a longer period of time than Almodóvar, right? And I mean, all about my mother, right? Kind of, his film, his mother appears in, so many of the early ones, and mothers are very important. But what's interesting is that fathers in his films are often absent, or they've got Alzheimer's or something. I think this is the first film in which you actually see, his father represented in a way that is sympathetic, really, So he's been a very loving son, and of course, and he's been very successful. But in that conversation, there's a kind of a coded tension over his sexuality, right? So because the mother says something, I wanted to move in with you with Madrid, but you squirmed out of it by, saying that I wouldn't be comfortable there. And he says, oh, well, I was filming and whatever. And basically, it's not the filming that was the issue. It was his sexuality that was the issue. And she has this line where she says, I've gotten used to so many things in my life, right? Like, I've had to adapt and kind of, I've gotten used to so many things. I'm sure I would have gotten used to anything, right? So,
and he says, "I'm sorry, I wasn't the son you wanted because of the way I am."
And then that was beautiful. Yes. So I failed you, but I failed you not by what I've done, but just by who I am.
Yeah.
That was lovely. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Very resonant to gay men. You know.
I mean, I'm thinking like the whole way through, whenever something, there were just all these things that popped up. I thought, well, this is a film for Jose.
It is
not just the sexuality, but also the setting and the kind of the relationships and the thing. I thought, this is a film. This is no wonder this speaks to you. And I did think. Remember, we were talking about animals a little while ago, and you said, "Oh, I'm so tired." Whenever filmmakers make films about writing or filmmaking, yes. I'm like, well, I bet you don't feel the same way about Almodóvar.
I don't. But also because so many. Because it's not just about filmmaking, right? I mean, so let me just before I forget, delineate the things that sparked something in me. I mean, first of all, I come from the same background, and actually for years and years and years, one of the things that English critics never got about Almodóvar is he caught the words of, Spanish peasants. That very particular language, the phraseology, I could, the words that he puts in his mother's and his sisters in his films, my mother says them and my aunt say them, all those expressions. I mean, I was talking to my father the other day, and he, in the car, we were talking about Brexit, and he said something, like, fear is free. People can have as much of it as they want, right? Yeah, kind of. Those are the kinds of things that you often, that often Almodóvar's mother or something like that will say in his films, right? Or the way that they talk to the neighbors. I mean, you saw, when you came to visit, my mom always goes out of the house and kind of chats with her neighbors at night. Yeah. So the life and the language kind of really resonate with me to very specific terms, in very specific ways. The encyclopedia the child is reading to learn, and at school, it's the one I use to learn at school. Is the same encyclopedia, right? So it has those resonances. And then there were things like, when they mentioned the drugs or Madrid in 1981 and so on, right? Which was just before AIDS hit, but, which Spain was suffering from drugs because, and I remember the period so well, there was, when democracy came in and when censorship was abolished in 1978, people had this feeling that Spain was, completely behind in everything. Yeah, it wasn't modern. Right, and so there was this really quick attempt to catch up. So all the things that people had been forbidden was like this thirst to experience them, right? But it all happened immediately. And one of the things that opened up like a Pandora's box was drugs, right? Because if drugs had been forbidden, it wasn't necessarily because they were bad. It was just because Franco was such an evil fascist, right? And actually, maybe this inability immediately to distinguish between like heroin and cocaine and grass, right? It's like, so there was like this kind of thirst to experiment and to go for what had been previously forbidden. And there was a heroin epidemic. So many people died of heroin in that period, including in my own little village, right? Which you would think would be immune, to the movements in the capital, right? But no, we had drug overdoses and in fact, AIDS due to drug people sharing. Using the same needle in this little tiny village where I'm from, right? So kind of, all of those things really resonate with me. That's why, sometimes I don't trust myself, because you think, well, is it very meaningful to you? Or is it really great? And they're not necessarily the same thing. Something could be very meaningful to you, and yet be incoherent to someone else, or not touch them in the same way. Though I think I
don't think that's necessarily that big a deal. Though I think if a film really resonates with you in such a specific and meaningful individual way, then what does it matter that it's not so great to someone else?
Well, it doesn't if you're just a civilian. If you're a film critic, it matters. You want to convince other people. You want to offer proof. You want to kind of demonstrate why other people who are not you and who don't share your history might nonetheless find this film of importance and of value.
Sure.
And I think this film does. I mean, if nothing else, just the ease of the narration. I mean, it's an incredibly complex narration, but again, this time it feels easy. So it's not like Bad Education, where you feel like it's like these matryoshka dolls, one and the other, and and nothing is told clearly, and you're asked to interpret, but in this one, it has a similar complexity of technique, but the effect is kind of seamless, yeah? You're not like in Bad Education wondering how this connects to the other, is it a story within a story? Yeah, this one is rendered seamlessly. And I just think it's kind of an astonishing kind of, use of technique for this kind of, making something very complex seem really fluid this time. Like,
it is incredibly fluid, and I was also really impressed with how kind of confident it is to just move on. So when the actor character Alberto is no longer sort of important to the story, he's dropped. The last time we see him is when he's been performing the play. That leads him to reconnect with Federico, and that's the last you see of Alberto.
It is.
And it's not like he's there just to serve that purpose. There is this purpose about him, kind of Salvador reconnecting with him and kind of thinking about his past and trying to forgive, but ultimately not quite able to, and this sort of thing. So that's all kind of that's all there. But also once it's time to move on, there's no need to force him back into the story. That part of the story's ended. We're moving on to Federico. We're moving on to the painting.
It's almost like the Antonio Banderas character. So in the present, there are two men. There's the actor whom he thinks failed him and who he's now changed his mind. And there's the lover who he thinks he failed and has disappeared, right? And they're connected by addiction. So, both of the characters were addicted to heroin, right? And in fact, there's a kind of an element of addiction in that, the film director is addicted to his addict boyfriend, right? So, kind of there's a kind of a very, his screenplays are so fantastic, really, because you can see how, there's all these layers of connection amongst those things, right? But to me, what's interesting is that narrationally, you have, first of all, a flashback into this youth that is maintained throughout, right? So it's always a flashback to the past, right? But the past of him as a child, the same age, yeah? It's a very particular moment of the past. It's just before he's going to go to school, which is something that will distance him. Going to high school is something that will distance him from his family, yeah? He has a chance at education, at bettering himself that is not available, to people of that class background. But the character of the director is developed first in relation, to that performance and that actor who he thinks failed. Secondly, to the person he was addicted to who left, right? And lastly, in the film within the film, to this man that was so beautiful that it awakened in him a kind of unconscious sexual desire, that caused him to faint. Yeah. And I think kind of those are, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think I can't add to that.
Okay. Good. I had so many things to say and I now forget. I think it's a really great film.
I wanted to talk a little bit, or at least think a little bit about the hospital and kind of physicality. That's always there in the film. Hospital is always there. Obviously, his mother ends up in hospital. That's how she ends her life, despite wanting to go back to her village. He's not able to take her there. But obviously, Salvador is in constant physical pain. And there's this wonderful sequence quite early on where, through voiceover, he talks about his maladies and and how everything, his life revolves around his spine since he had surgery on it 2 years ago. But all these kind of pills he's taking, all these muscle aches and fatigue and things, and it's animated in this almost like Saul Bass sort of stylized animation, or like Saul Bass crossed with.
They're by Juan Gatti.
Sorry.
I think all of those in the title are by this designer called Juan Gatti.
I just want to look him up. What's his name? Juan
Gatti, Gatti.
The Argentinian multi-talented Juan Gatti is generally known as a commercial photographer and graphic designer, often collaborating with film director Pedro Almodóvar. His less known work includes anatomy drawings of human body in combination with the taxonomy of plants and exotic animals.
There you go.
And this wonderful sort of animated thing, and it reminded me almost of like sort of music videos from like 2003 or something, with these kind of 3D animated skeletons that revolve and just sort of sit there, and these splashes of colour and things. And there's a wonderful shot in it, where you have these skinless human bodies, just muscle and bone, kind of arranged and posed like sculptures in an art gallery. Fantastic and weird.
I think they are the work of Pérez Vialta, yeah. So you can see some of them here.
All right.
Yeah, he was a very famous Spanish painter, and whom he says in the story. There's a line in the story. This museum wants to borrow your 2 Pérez Vialtas, and he says no.
Ah,
right.
Okay. There you go.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Pérez Vialta was also one of the painters of the movida madrileña, yeah. So of that period, yeah, that kind of Almodóvar started his first films. So let me.
Yeah, because he says the character says, I can't give them the paintings. I won't give them the paintings. I live with them. They're my friends. He says, or something like that.
Yes, he does. That's what he says. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is how important to me it is. This is a film about old people. So, the reason why he's ill and he's got this problem and he's got that problem and he's taking his pills every day.
That's what I wanted to get to. Yeah,
yeah, it has to do with
sense of impending physicality.
Yeah,
and the thing about the ossification. We only find out later it's an ossification of his bone. You think it might be a tumor, but of this thing pressing on his throat.
Yes.
That kind of is forcing him. He can't even eat. He can barely drink a smoothie, let alone eat anything solid. The idea that his kind of body is closing in on him.
Yes.
That's why he's in the pool at the start. He's taking pressure off himself.
That's right. But it's a rare film that deals with old age, that doesn't actually end up with the death of the protagonist. And in fact, this is a film that is about old age in many, many ways, that ends up on a high note, right? So a director who's too depressed to do anything, who can barely move, who can no longer tie his shoes. By the end of the film, he's made a movie. Yes. Right? So,
Yeah, it is a triumphant shot, isn't it, right at the end?
It
feels... That's how it felt to me. It's like a taking control of his story.
Yeah. Well, very much a taking control of his story, right? I love so many things about that shot, actually. So for example, little things. I must mention how great Penélope Cruz is. There's a scene where she's doing the washing, where she kind of just smiles at the woman singing ouevre, and there's like this incredible radiance about her. She's just such a movie star, really. But then the very last shot, she does this lovely thing where, there's the clapperboard, the camera pulls back, you see that it's a movie within a movie, right? And then as soon as it's clear that the take is over, she reaches out to the boy and makes sure that he's okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was so lovely.
Yeah. And I think it's triumphant because, Salvador got to make a movie with Penelope Cruz.
That's right.
That's triumphant.
You can't get any better. So, I've got a million things to say, I suppose, but I need to think them through more. I think this is the second time I've seen it. I find it deeply moving and very, very beautiful, really, and a lesson to filmmakers. So I was going to say that I can't think of anybody who's writing screenplays better at the moment, right? More purposefully. But I think this is so beyond just the screenplay, right? It is, as I was trying to say earlier, a film in which a camera move says something, and everything is kind of expressive, right? So those scenes where, the the actor is doing a diction and he's rehearsing it, you know, and you go and it cuts to the seats, right, and then kind of, you know, the seats are just, you know, lines of gold on black, right, kind of just very beautiful and very expressive. And then the storytelling, so, you know, there's a scene where, you know, Antonio Banderas has just been told something and he's waiting, and then you realize he's waiting at the doctor's office. So, you know, this incredible fluidity of just kind of changing space, right? You know,
that scene in which Alberto performs Addiction is, I would say, kind of the cinematic sort of highlight or centerpiece of the film, and it's the one that best expresses what you're talking about, in that he does start off rehearsing it in front of nobody, but fluidly, as he's performing it to himself, it becomes a performance to an audience. The audience shows up,
yes.
and he's kind of moving around, and he moves onto these canvases of pure red and pure white, and these things
lovely.
fill the screen in kind of abstract ways.
Yes.
But it all happens, as you say, very, very fluidly. There's a shot really early on in the film, or cut rather, that struck me as just kind of beautifully timed and managed, which was where a guy in that hotel lobby is playing the piano, and then the camera cuts to his hands,
yes.
and the camera cuts away, and you see that it's the priest
yes.
from Salvador's childhood playing the piano. Exactly the same piece, exactly the same. And you get through these two cuts, through this piece of music, he's been taken back to his past. As you say, all of those flashbacks, although I suppose it turns out they're not exactly flashbacks, but you know, that's what they appear to be, at least. They are all motivated by Salvador thinking about his past, you know, or like it'll cut to one which isn't necessarily motivated, but when it cuts out, you'll see Salvador in a state of kind of meditation or thinking. It's clearly something he's thinking about. It's not a story being told, sort of. They're not parallel stories being told. It is a story that is active in his mind. And I think that's exactly how it was in Julieta as well. Remember that being the way it was in Julieta, when you came back from those flashbacks or those extended scenes in the past, it always ended up with Julieta thinking about where she was.
Yes, though, you know, I'll have to see Julieta again, but I think this is a much, much greater film than Julieta. You know, it's so much, well, to me it was so much more affecting, but it's also so much more complex, really. And it's dealing, you know, with so many more issues, you know. So on the one hand, it's about aging, it's about making art and making films, you know, it's about Spain in the 50s and Spain in the 80s. It's about regret and love and longing and kind of, you know, looking at the past, yeah.
Well, I like the way it makes the past alive.
Yes,
the way it does that. It's
exactly.
not. Those flashbacks aren't about informing who he is now.
No.
Not only that, but they are about the fact that he is thinking about his past.
Yes.
That's what's important.
Yes. I mean, obviously they're related to who he is now.
Yeah.
You know, and they're part of his development, you know, but they're not about who he is now. Yeah, they are about the past, right? And they are about a boy, right? Like, you know, it's not, you know, that boy is not only a reflection on who he is now. He's telling you other things. He's telling you his family is poor, right? Yeah, that, you know, that there's, you know, that it's from an illiterate culture where grown people don't know how to write, or don't know the alphabet and don't know how to do sums. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are being told, you know, to you, as well as what, you know, as well as about how this boy became this man.
Yeah, and I like I liked how the young Salvador is advanced. You know, he can read and he can write, and he starts teaching the guy next door who's, you know, 15, 20 years older.
Yes.
And teaches him, like, I suppose in that way you're saying there's no real father figure in this. He in a way becomes the father figure to that guy.
Well,
and
he's teacher him, for sure.
Certainly a teacher. He's teaching him like a very strict teacher as well.
Yes.
Don't hold your pencil like that. Hold it like this.
Yes.
And then he's encouraging. He's very precocious.
Yes.
You know, and you can see why it's the kind of kid who grows up to take notes in books.
Yes.
I don't think you should ever deface a book. Disgusting.
Well, I do it all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I will certainly kind of write more about all of this at some point. But for now, really, I urge everyone to see it. It's playing in Birmingham at Cineworld for now. There's a run at the Electric, in the next couple of weeks. So it's a film that will be in town for a little while. And, to me, it's a great masterpiece.
It's very good. I liked it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
If Pedro Almodóvar had been a Birmingham Jew, then maybe I would relate to it more.
Well, actually, I've been very surprised about, because it has gotten great reviews, but I have read, especially reviews from younger gay men, and they're respectful, but they're not fully engaged. Yeah, they're not. It's not a love the way I feel it's a love. And actually, I do think that as Almodóvar has aged and as his films have become richer and more complex, they're more demanding, right, of an audience. They're a great pleasure, but they're more demanding, and they're certainly more demanding of critics. Because I do think that this is a film in which certainly a critic, would appreciate this one a lot more if seen as part of an oeuvre, of an unfolding oeuvre, really, and not just kind of as an individual film. And
what does oeuvre mean? What's oeuvre in English?
The
egg. and there's an egg in
this. It's not the same to say work as to say oeuvre.
Yeah. Body of work.
The body of work, I suppose. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Jolly good.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube, and on social media we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Cheerio.